What's up, everybody? It's the Digital World Podcast, and this is an interesting article that I think a lot of you should be aware of. Whether you're religious or not, I think this gives you an indication of where a lot of things might be headed. And before I go any further and give you a long-winded introduction, I'm gonna go ahead and get straight into the article and let it speak for itself, and then I'll talk more about it. Here we see that the Biden administration is compiling a database of religious objectors to the medicine within obscure agency. And this almost reminds me like the IRS, where they're out to get you, right? And okay, let me keep reading before I get sidetracked here. So it's called the Pretrial Services Agency announced an Orwellian tracking scheme on Tuesday that could serve as a model for the entire U.S. government to collect the names and personal religious information of federal employees who make religious accommodation requests for religious exemption from the medicine. This is according to the Daily Signal. So the primary purpose of this secured electronic file repository is to collect, to maintain, to use, and to the extent appropriate and necessary, disseminate employee religious exemption request information. So folks, they say all your information will be private, and only those individuals that ask for those individuals who will need the information will be privy to it. I know at work they let you know your information will be private and those who need it to make decisions will have access to it. Well, that's kind of generic, right? There's not an exact list of people that can have access to it. So that tells me if it's an emergency, they can give it to whoever asked for it because they'll say they're in charge and they need it because it's an emergency, right? So you gotta read the fine details when it comes to these things, especially. So this is apparently started for federal workers. That does not mean it will not expand and hit the private industry, right? Because there's a lot of private companies that have that information. And if the government asks for it because they declared an emergency and need the information, the companies will have to give it up. Or they can withhold, but obviously these companies want money and don't want to be shut down, so they're going to comply. And it'll be rare to find the company that doesn't. So the announcement does not explain why the agency needs to create this list, except to say that it will assist the agency in the collecting, storing, dissemination, and disposal of employee religious exemption request information. The announcement also does not say what the agency will do with this information after it has decided an employee's accommodation request, right? And it doesn't explain why the administration chose to test this policy in an agency that is majority black staff. And now they're, saying, African Americans are more religious and have less inoculations than other groups. Okay, and then they're making the point, so much for the president's commitment to racial equality, or equity, sorry. So the Daily Signal is suggesting, and this is what I was pointing at earlier, that this could be a tiny agency that's being used as a testing grounds that could then be disseminated across the entire government. And now they have access to everything. That's what I was talking about, these private corporations or companies, right? Like the one I work for, that they're collecting the information for themselves and for the people. Oh, and only the people who have, access to this can see that information, right? But they say it remains private. But however, like I said, if the government decides that it needs to be privy to this information, then they're going to ask of these companies. And what they'd use it for? I mean, folks, here's my take on this, okay? There's always been, at least if you look in the medieval times, in the medieval period, there was a lot of religious persecution, right? We know that the dominating religion of the time was the Catholic Church. If your views opposed that of the Roman Catholic Church, you were labeled a heretic. You were labeled a traitor. You were labeled all sorts of things. Burned at the stake, etc., etc. The list goes on. There are many martyrs who died at the hands of the Roman Catholic Church. Now, this is not to say that there's people who aren't good, who are Catholic. No, that's not at all what I'm saying. The system of the Roman Catholic Church historically, if we're talking facts here, has persecuted dissenters who oppose what they believed, right? And could it be that this is a rekindling of something like that? Now, a lot of people will say, oh, no, you're crazy. We're in the U.S., which it's a free country. You have freedoms, so forth and so on. That would never happen. Folks, I'm sure the Romans, the Greeks, the, Assyrians, Persians, all these nations, I'm sure they thought they would never fall. Their empires would last forever. What happened? They fell. Someone else took power. Other things happened. So just because you as a person can't see it happen doesn't mean it cannot happen. If I asked you in 2018, 2019, you'll be locked down in your house, your freedoms will be curtailed, and in some places you'll get beat up, you'll be taken to jail because you're not wearing a mask. And your job will be at risk because you don't choose to take the medicine. You would have told me I was crazy. You would have told me I'm making this up. I'm a conspiracy theorist. So as I look at it today, maybe it won't be used as that. Maybe it'll be for other means. Maybe it's not a religious perspective. Maybe it could be just a totalitarian control thing. But I will not rule it out. I think this is a very interesting thing because when you mix church and state, that's a dangerous and potent combination. You want to make sure you separate the two. And for me, seeing that this is where they're starting from is a little concerning. Because historically, the mixing church and state always leads to persecution. And always leads to the classification of people in society. Two groups. The dissenters, the people who are opposed, the Protestants, if you want to call it that. And then those who comply and go along with what is being asked of them, whether they agree with it or not. So this is something to look into. It's concerning to say the least, but nevertheless important to take note of. And I'm interested in hearing your guys' thoughts. So if you have different thoughts, I'd like to hear it and see what you guys are thinking. This is the Digital World Podcast, and I'll see you in the next episode.